From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events as reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom. On today's show, Bruce Rauner, the Enigma. He was elected because he said he was going to fix Illinois. No details, he just asked us to trust him, and today we're beginning to understand how he plans to fix us. A couple of years ago, Governor Quinn and the legislature passed a big increase to the state income tax from 3% to 5%, with a stipulation that on January 1st of this year, it was going to go back down to 3.75%. Are you following all this? Unless the legislature acted. Now, it didn't act, and the new governor campaigned in favor of letting it drop, so the state dropped it, and now we have $2 billion a year less to spend by the state government. And somebody earning about $1,000 a week, I've seen these different calculations, a pretty good salary on average, $1,000 a week, has saved about $11 a week in taxes. And what do we get in return for that? Well, $1.5 billion in Medicaid cuts, $128 million in cuts to the RTA, CTA, $385 million in cuts to higher education. Now, of course, if you earn way less than that $50,000, then your weekly savings might only be $2 or $3. But that's not going to mean much when CTA fares have to go up 50 cents or your medical services get cut drastically. And of course, if you fly in Governor Rauner's circles, it's a different story because he earned so much money last year. His taxes could drop by about $750,000 this year. But here's the crazy part. The governor has proposed to cut subsidies to cities and towns and to transportation and schools. So they'll just have to raise their own taxes to make up the difference, right? So it all just gets shifted. So don't spend that $10 anywhere because you're going to pay it back in city taxes and fare increases. But the governor gets to claim that he's made Illinois more business friendly, and that's kind of funny because we already have lower taxes than Indiana, but that's a different story for a different show. On today's show, how Bruce Rauner's proposed budget will affect you as a Chicagoan. Joining us today, John Bouman, the president of the Shriver Center and head of the Responsible Budget Coalition here in Illinois. Pleasure to have you on the show, John. Thank you for joining us for the first time. The Responsible Budget Coalition is arguing for budget reform in Illinois, but probably a different kind of budget reform than Bruce Rauner wants, and we'll get details on that. Also, Lolly Bowean is joining us again from the Tribune. She's written about some of these services, large and small, that are going to be affected, and it's great to have you back, Lolly. Thank you. And once again, back from the DePriest Voters Chronicle, and a former editor of the Chicago Defender, Glenn Reedus, back at the table again. Glad to have you here. Lolly, why don't you start us off, just for the heck of it? You've written some things about this. Give us just a sort of a general picture. If you're a citizen of Chicago, are you going to see, are these budget reductions that the governor is both proposing and has done, are they real? Will they really affect you in a real way, or is it just abstract?
Oh, absolutely. These budget cuts, right now, they look like numbers on a piece of paper. A lot of social organizations are still trying to work through their budgets to figure out how they are going to manage with less money. So there's going to be a moment where we're having a pause until it actually trickles down to daily effects. But budget cuts mean less money for organizations to work with, for transportation companies to work with, and those deficits don't just disappear. That means that eventually we, the same taxpayers that are going to save the $11 per paycheck, are going to have to make up for it somewhere. Mm-hmm. So we're going to see it, whether it's in your medical bills, whether it's a hike in CTA fares, whether it's the loss of jobs. Mm-hmm. Then we're going to definitely see some cuts.
Glenn, what are you seeing? You have the same.
Well, from a very different perspective, the governor has provided fodder for some political opponents to take on his budget, like Commissioner Boykin, Cook County Commissioner Boykin, who got a resolution passed, I think yesterday or the day before, opposing the cuts, and I don't know what kind of traction that's going to get. Mm-hmm. But, there's talk in the city council as well, is trying to force the state government to restore some of these. Mm-hmm. But it's tough to understand where or why the cuts are where they are. To stop burying people. The what is called paupers field. That's been in existence ever since I can remember. And is there a substantial savings in something like that? It's like grabbing the low-hanging fruit. Social services impacts a lot of low-income people. Low-income people don't really have a big voice in local or state government, so it's easy to pick on them, if you will.
I mean, it also gets this feeling of like sort of squeezing the balloon. You know, it's like you can save this little bit of money here, but it's just going to pop out in an expense somewhere
Exactly.
else. And that's probably nowhere more true than in things like medical services, where if you stop giving services to this population, they're just going to end up in your emergency rooms or something else. They're going to be less healthy.
Well, and if you're in Cook County, the emergency room is, for people who don't have insurance, is paid for by property tax.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's more expensive than covering someone with insurance so they can have a relationship with a doctor and stay out of the emergency room.
Right. Well, John, now your organization, the Responsible Budget Coalition, you've been trying for some time to sort of get attention for how to rethink the Illinois budget in a way that's probably different than the way Mr. Rauner wants to rethink it.
We have had for decades a consensus in Illinois from both parties, governors and legislators from both parties, that what they want from state government is health care, human services, education, and public safety. And in fact, that's over 90 cents on the dollar of the discretionary spending in the state budget. That's exactly what it goes for. So if you're going to cut your way out of a budget crisis, that's what you have to cut. And that's what we've seen in Rauner's proposal.
You can't not touch it.
Before the recession, and for decades, we have never in Illinois managed to get ourselves to raise the money to keep those promises and to do those vital services that everybody expects from state government.
Right.
So, we've had a revenue problem in this state for decades. The recession turned it into a train wreck and increased the deficit exponentially. And that's why 4 years ago, the General Assembly passed a temporary income tax increase. Without that, we would now be about $30 billion in deficit. So while it didn't solve the problem, it did a lot to sort of keep it under somewhat of control.
And I think it's important, just to interject here, this is a different conversation from the conversation about the $100 billion in unfunded pension mandates and liabilities. It's a completely different conversation. This is a conversation about how we work our everyday budget to provide the services, like you said, that we're supposed to provide.
And in a sense, it's related, though, because one of the things we never taxed ourselves to keep a promise was the payments to the pension. And because we're chronically short of revenue year in and year out, we do kind of short-sighted things to get through each fiscal year with an allegedly balanced budget. And one of those things that governors of both parties have done year in and year out for decades now is to skip the payment to the pension system, right? So
You could also say steal money from the pension.
Right, and then they don't pay the bills to Medicaid providers and so on. So the point I'm trying to get to is this. What we've done by letting the income tax roll back to 3.75% is to give a tax cut that overwhelmingly goes to the, as you mentioned, the higher income people, the wealthier people, and corporations. And we're paying for it, or at least under Rauner's proposal, we would pay for it, by all these cuts to programs for vital services for needy people and at-risk populations and basic government services that we all want. And so that's what people have to understand is that this is not a spending crisis, it's a revenue crisis. And it always has been. And we have to find a way to raise the money to pay for vital things. That also helps the economy.
Absolutely. I want to take a moment to now point a or paint a picture of what needy looks like and then how it comes home to us. As you pointed out, these are services that affect the needy, and sometimes I think that we can push away that idea by thinking that, well, I'm a working person, therefore I'm not needy. But low-income residents come in all shapes and sizes. They are the retired who are on limited incomes, who need Medicaid in order to get their health care. They are people who are disabled, who also need vital services. They are homeless teenagers who find themselves in crisis and without a place to go. So the money that's being cut comes back home to us when you see that your grandmother now can't take an ambulance to the hospital anymore, or that the PACE bus that used to cost $3 now costs $4, and that cuts into money for medication. So these programs, although they may not feel like they're being directly used by the middle class, all of us are touched in some way. And then the money that is cut, it drains right back down to us because we have to make up for it in some way. Whether that means your copay for your insurance, your private insurance ends up going up, whether that means that you end up paying more for just basic services, we're gonna have to pay for it in some way.
The other thing about this is to remember that the proposal is just that. It's a proposal. And to be fair, under Illinois law, the governor has to make a budget proposal that only counts income that's on the books. So there is a $6 billion deficit because of the loss of the income tax revenue. So he had to propose a budget that only had cuts in it. He could have said, but I'd rather do something else.
Yeah.
He hasn't said that. But so at this point, it's sort of the opening gambit in the budget debate. We don't actually know exactly where Rauner might come out. Disagree with you a little bit in your opening remarks. We'll see. This is sort of hanging fire right now. What it looks like is that he is proposing this budget, and if he doesn't get what he wants on certain other fronts, then he's perfectly fine with having it passed the way it is. So he's holding sort of hostage these cuts, including, for example, child care for 6-year-olds and over.
Right.
And he wants a bunch of business reforms, and what he's saying is, if I don't get this, I'm not going to support the revenue.
But doesn't he have to defend this proposed budget? I mean, otherwise he looks very disingenuous for putting it out in the first place.
And I think the defense is, well, we just don't have the money.
We don't have the money. Yeah.
And the so he's not. I don't think he and his staff and agency heads and so on, they're not trying to justify it by saying it's a good idea. They're not referring to any evidence. They're not saying it's what people need. They're just saying, tough, we don't have the money. Which the answer to that, of course, is, well, the money's there if you want it, right? There's a host of ideas for smart revenue reforms in Illinois that would help us pay to keep our promises. So it's like the money's sitting there on the table and they're saying, well, I don't have the money. All you have to do is take it.
It's interesting because we've seen this over and over again. I mean, this is like one of the great plays from the Mayor Daley playbook. The CTA gets into trouble, as it did so often in his time, and the answer is, oh, this is too bad. We're going to have to close the red line, because that gets people's attention, and then people get all riled up about it, and then you can get the thing that you wanted, which was to get the fare increase or whatever it was. And our current mayor has done very similar kinds of things by saying, I'm going to have to close 350 schools, and then expecting us to stand up and cheer him when he only closes 50. So I think there's some of that going on here now, that it's like, well, here's this budget. We're just going to have to let 20 or 30,000 people die because there just won't be any money to keep them alive. But we could maybe do something else, which leads to the question, is Bruce Rauner Nixon in China? Is he going to be the guy who actually is going to get these revenue increases, may I say tax increases that we seem to need? Is he going to be the guy who's going to actually do it and we just don't realize that now?
if he is, I think he's looking at being a one-term governor, and I don't know if he minds that.
He says he doesn't care about that, right?
Well, yeah, but once people get in there and they get a good sense of how it feels, suddenly it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, it won't even be enough time for him to rebuild the governor's mansion in 4 years. It's going to take longer
with his money.
Right.
I think he. I'm just guessing here. I don't know anything inside, but I think he knows that there has to be significant revenue. I think he's trying to win these business reforms and to make some cuts to protect his right flank, right? And he needs Republican votes. That's what that's different now, right? In the past, with a Democratic governor and majorities in both chambers, you actually didn't have to have Republicans, although the Democrats always wanted some, so they could say things were bipartisan. Now, I don't think the leaders of the House and Senate are going to be able to get Democratic majorities for the kind of budget that looks like shaping up here. And the Republicans are going to have to vote for some revenue. So it's a very interesting conundrum they're in, which most people predicting that it's going to last into the summer.
But I think we should acknowledge too that by coming out with these tough cuts, and particularly cutting social services, that this does satisfy Bruce Rauner's constituency. That the higher paid, more wealthy residents of our state are more likely to be in support of cutting these programs that they don't see necessarily as worthy.
Yeah, and it's also important to draw the distinction between things that are proposed and things that are actually real, because the budget, how do we put this? Because the cut in the income tax happened in January, in the middle of the budget literally has less money in it than had been envisioned. So there is no choice but to make cuts immediately. And some of the cuts that you've written about are real and on the ground. They have happened.
Right.
This is not something we're just talking about.
It's the difference between the year we're in and the year we're planning for,
Right.
which is July
Right.
1.
Right.
And the year we're in, they had to make cuts, and they're real.
Yeah, they're real. And it's interesting that those cuts are real. And at this point, although they're significant, they're pretty modest, but many of the social organizations that I talked to were concerned that if they have to take 2.5% of their budget now and figure out how to reconfigure and do their work off that, what's to come for next year.
Yeah.
Now, there's some hope I read about this morning, that the economic forecasters in state government are thinking that we might have 300 to 500 million more dollars than we thought we did because of the strong economy, so the taxes are coming in
Well, that's because
higher.
of Governor Rauner's just being elected, right? The business climate is better already.
Well, who knows? Although I think it's the tax returns for the calendar 14.
Oh,
so those
okay.
are a little before that. And that responds to the general improvement in the economy. I don't think there's any particular state policy that caused that. But the point is, it might relieve some of the pressure on the in-year cuts. They might not have to make some of the cuts.
Just because there'd be more revenue coming in than had been
They
projected.
have more money than they thought.
Right.
And because the whole justification for those in-year cuts has been, yeah, this is terrible, we just don't have the money. Well, now maybe they have the money.
Well, let's talk for a minute about one of the really more insidious things in this budget, to me anyway, is this idea that you could tell me, John, I have no idea, but for decades, I assume, the state has always shared that income tax money with municipalities, right? So that's just written into the formula, where the state gets $1 and it gives 20 cents splits it out around the state.
Right, there's a percentage that goes to the local government.
That is being cut back dramatically, which I can only assume means that if you are, and let's not even talk about Chicago here, let's talk about a tiny town in the middle of the state somewhere of 5,000 people.
Right.
I don't know how much state share they get. It's probably only a few $100,000, but you cut 20% of that.
But that's big money in
You're
their budget.
losing your police force. You're losing your waterworks or something.
This is a triple whammy, okay? You have all these other cuts where the practical, if you defund the solution to the problem doesn't go away. It still lives where the geography is, where the people are who have the problem, right? So that shifts the responsibility to local government.
Right.
Now you've also got a proposal to take funding away from local government. And Rauner has an idea to freeze property taxes. For
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We forgot that part. Yes. Let's also freeze property taxes. Right. So the government, the Illinois government, gets to make itself more whole because it's basically taking all this money back from every municipality in the state, and he gets to claim that he's done a better job of making the state whole, and meanwhile he's bankrupting hundreds of small municipalities and really crippling a bunch of the bigger ones, which then have no option but to raise their own taxes, unless of course there's a property tax freeze and they can't even do that. So the thing that I guess I've never understood, and no one has ever been able to explain this to me, is how you can cut your way out of these problems. Look, it comes down to this. We have government for a reason, right? I know that since 1980 we've learned that government is the problem and all that, but it isn't. In most cases, government is the thing that allows us to do the things that the private sector cannot or will not or is not willing to do. And we need money for that. And it's not an amount that was written into the Constitution 200 years ago. That amount has to rise with the amount that costs rise. We just have to accept that.
Right.
Well, that may be popular around this table, but of course there are other tables
that is
where
the
it's
big
not.
ideological divide right now. The big conversation in American life, right, is what is the role of government?
Right.
Why does it matter to those of us who are not poor that we organize ourselves to provide opportunity for people who are? And that's the sort of Cook Brothers network, and they're said that it's okay to have winners and losers and big extremes of winners and losers.
That's right. Right.
And that's just, you get what you deserve.
Yeah.
And that's just not. There's not much of a future.
The vast majority of, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna add, because the majority of people fall under that category of needy, low income, and poor. So there is not much of a future in saying do for yourself, and that government is not gonna assist you, help out, or be there to protect you in any way.
The vast majority of taxes that I pay as an individual go to municipalities and other entities that educate children. I don't happen to have any children. So it's sort of like, why am I spending all this money to educate a bunch of kids that I don't have? Well, there's a very simple reason for that, because it's the future of our country and everything else. It is important that we do these things.
And your property value and your quality of life in your community.
Everything is everything.
The quality of political discourse, right? If people are
quality
educated.
of life, for sure. And when you've got people leaving Chicago, so you got fewer people trying to fill the pot, and what had been coming in is no longer there, it's an impossible situation.
Yeah.
And when you compare Chicago to other major cities, or when you travel to other cities and you hear residents talk about their pride of living where they live, the majority of the time, the reason they're proud is because of the way that their residents are kept by their government, that their kids can go to college for free. That's what our Canadian neighbors tell us, that they can go to the hospital and receive health care when it's necessary. So, part of having high morale and feeling good about where you live is making sure that these services are available, that the most vulnerable, the most needy are protected, and that there are social networks in place that is going to make sure that they're taken care of.
And we should also make it pretty clear that we're not talking about the People's Republic here. Illinois currently, with the 5% income tax, was around 30th in taxing its its people among the 50 states. So with the rollback, we're back in the 30s. We're in the bottom third. And we're not a high spending state. 3/4 of the states spend more as a percentage of residents' income in state government than Illinois does. So we're not talking about putting Illinois in some extreme situation. We're just talking about being grown-ups and realizing we have to pay for the things we want from state government.
I get pretty tired of having us compared with Indiana and Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, with all due respect to our viewers in Indiana, Indiana has almost no population, and their issues, the things that they have to deal with, pale in comparison to the things that Illinois has to deal with. We have large populations of people who are poor. We have large populations of people who have needs of one sort or another that cannot and never will be taken care of by the private sector. And so it falls to government to help these people get some kind of decent life arrangement in their lives. And we, I think, as Americans, accepted from the beginning of our republic that that's the way we want it to be. But now that debate, as you say, that debate is taking us out.
Well, it's easy for the politicians to take that position, the comparable position of saying, well, in Indiana, they don't have to do this and they don't have to do that, but we need to. And so what happens, people think that, oh, well, we're better, but they don't drill down to see the true differences in the states. Milwaukee and Indianapolis are second-tier cities, and I mean, there's only Chicago, Houston, New York, L.A. that have anything that approaches the same problems, the same issues that we do.
Well, and the argument there kind of tends to play out on where's the best business climate, right? And so we're losing jobs to this state or that state, and there's a lot of false claims about the relationship between state and local taxes and decisions about business location. It's a factor, but it's like 10th on a list of 12.
Right.
More important are the things that you actually need from state government, like transportation system, good educated workforce, amenities, good health system, and let's face it, a market. Right?
That's right.
Would you rather set up a business in 12 million people or out in the countryside somewhere?
Well, as Rahm Emanuel has said, something to the effect, I don't want to get involved in this race to the bottom. It's like just because there are states around us that are willing to allow their people to be paid a lot less than we are, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do the same thing. And around we go. So we have. Well, I just wanted one thing. We have about a minute left. Just tell us that little story that I think you wrote something about the sickle cell.
The Sickle Cell Center at the University of Illinois.
Just a little tiny story that tells a bigger story.
Yes, that I can't remember how many people that center serves, but part of their work is that they give pain relief medication to sickle cell patients, and that prevents them from going to an emergency room to seek help, where they may have to sit for 6 to 8 hours. They can just come directly into the center and receive some relief. Now, again, people may think, well, I don't know anyone with sickle cell, I don't have sickle cell, how does that affect me? Well, it means that that's that relief from the emergency room, so that stops the emergency rooms from being clogged with people who are in pain by removing them and giving them their own sort of private services. That program would be completely eliminated.
And that's where we have to stop, I'm afraid. I'm really sorry. But I'm really happy to have you guys here. It was a very interesting conversation today. John Bouman, thank you very much for being here. Lolly Bowean, Glenn Reedus, always a pleasure. Hope you'll all come back again many, many more times. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can see us here anytime you like, and you can watch us online at this address, and you can check us out on iTunes too. See you next week with another show. Thanks very much. Bye.